Okay, okay. Right. Well, I think rather than like to hear what other people, where other people are at and things with, and what they found out so far with their analysis, rather than kind of start talking about how you can analyze things and things straight away. So, who would like to jump in next? Just say where you are.
I don't mind.
Okay, Sarah.
Yeah. So just I suppose just to talk about what my topic is about investigating the potential of incorporating sustainability in an English language teaching environment or English language school. I feel quite happy with where I'm up to in the process, in my research process, that is. As in, I think I'm at quite a similar stage to you, James. I've written my literature review and a draft of my method and methodology chapter. And like you, found the method and methodology chapter extremely challenging to write. I think partly because I thought it was a bit, at first I thought it was going to be quite dry, but then I started to apply it to what I was doing, the thinking process behind what I was doing, which of course then really made me think about what I was doing and the choices that I was making, and were they the right choice, or was there different ways that I should be doing it. And I suppose as well, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, for want of a better word, with ontology over the Christmas holidays, sort of thinking about, okay, ontology, what things exist? Oh, existence. And then I went down, had quite an existential crisis about existence and all things like this. But I think that was actually quite good. I felt like I learned quite a lot from it. So in terms of my data collection, one of the things that I noticed at the start of my data, I did a questionnaire to students, to teachers, to academic support, to sort of get a benchmark of where people were at and what their perceptions were. And then I've done some sort of workshops and things, and experimented with different things in the school and done participant observation. And what I started to notice was that what people had written on the questionnaires were not quite the same as how people seemed to be acting. But there were a couple of people who seemed to be very much more, I would say, passionate, or maybe not passionate, it's not the right word, interested in sustainability. And I decided to conduct some semi-structured interviews with them to really try to find out why were they interested and what had changed for them. Because if I could understand that, then perhaps that could be a catalyst for work inspiring other people. So I've done my interviews, and actually, I've got to be honest, I absolutely loved doing the interviews. I loved having those conversations with people. It was really interesting, and it made me think about working in the environmental movement, full stop. That actually, when you're talking to somebody one-to-one and you're asking questions, and there's a space to go, God, nobody's ever asked me about that, I've never thought about that before, and to explore that is, I think, really, really beneficial. But I also found it interesting as well, and quite reflected on a few things that I'd written in my introductory chapter as to why I think it's a good idea to incorporate sustainability into an English language school. And hearing somebody else say, well, it's going to be great if a student learns something here and then they can take it back to their home country. And I'm like, oh no, actually, do I think isn't that colonialism? Isn't that oh no? And I've written exactly the same thing in my introductory chapter. What am I basing anything on? So I've found myself in a very, I would say, I feel like I'm in a very reflexive stage at the moment in terms of looking at my data and considering it, and considering where I started from. So I suppose I've started to put into a spreadsheet my answers and responses, and started to highlight similar things or words that are reoccurring. And I've done the same with my interviews. I followed Abby's advice and used the Otter app to transcribe, although my boss is Northern Irish and it really didn't like that transcription. But anyway, that needs to be listened to a little bit more. And some of the Scouse people I interviewed were also a bit challenging in the app to transcribe. But going through and just, I think I need to do some more research into how to analyze it properly. But I feel that I'm somehow finding my way with it, although there's probably a better way of doing things. I'm just experimenting and drawing out things, and I feel that I'm drawing out themes and possibly some conclusions as well, I feel, or reflections that will go into the final stage. But yeah, the questions for me now are about the presentation of the findings and probably finding a bit more of a systematic route of data analysis. But overall, I think, yeah, I feel good, but I feel like I've ended up with some quite wicked problems in terms of what the research has brought about, and probably more questions than answers. But I don't think that's a bad thing.
I'm afraid sustainability and wicked problems go hand in hand, basically. So yeah, I mean, I think people often underestimate the work. If they're thinking about transcribing, it is a lot of work, and if you can get that up, but if you can do what James has done as well and actually record it, make notes during and immediately after the interview, and have the recording, and then come back to look at the analysis, so that you've got also your notes and recordings to go back over things and pick things up, then that can work sufficiently well, certainly for the size of research that you're doing generally for this dissertation, as well as transcribing. It just means that you can't perhaps analyze in quite the same way. I don't suppose anybody's using very sophisticated software to do the analysis, which is what can happen. But I mean, having access to that, because if you had to buy it yourself, it costs hundreds of pounds and things. So, nobody's going to do that for their dissertation. And even if you're part of a university setup, you don't always have access to that sort of thing. So then you're down to using, eyeballing the data is a good starting point for that. And then starting to draw out and count words or themes and things that are coming through and so on. Okay. Perhaps more on that. Anybody want to raise any questions or comments with Sarah?
Yeah, I just have one question actually, Sarah, as you started discussing, and also following up on James, I just noted down here, as you're looking at the data now, I was just curious as to, and also an open question to everybody, if their approach is it inductive or deductive? So if you're approaching the data with already preconceptions and a hypothesis, and you're looking at it from that approach, or you're just letting the data speak for itself and then drawing the conclusions from that. I'm really struggling. That's the position I'm in. I'm not sure if I'm coming in with presumptions, or if I've got a hypothesis that needs testing or proving, or if I'm just letting the data speak for itself, or if it's a bit of both, or that's my kind of question for everybody.
I think for me personally, I'm trying to use an inductive approach. But I hear what you're saying about having presumptions and trying to stand back from that. But also, I don't know, some of what's actually coming through on in the answers that I'm looking at is making me really question any presumptions that I had in the first place. And yeah. So yeah, trying to be as inductive as possible.
Inductive. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome, Beverly.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, hello. I'm late. I got stuck in the queue at the pharmacy.
Okay. We're just sort of going round, and we've heard from James and from Sarah so far on where they're at, and in particular where they're coming up against things like how to approach analysing the data, presenting the data, and also probably coming across things like methodologies and things like that, and challenges with writing that chapter and so on. So does anybody else want to come back on Abby's, Izzy's question at the moment, or you'll say?
I guess I could just say that was a really good question, Izzy, and something that I'm kind of, that's what I was writing the whole methodology and thinking about my thinking and how subjective I am in the process, that how will I approach the analysis, because I am obviously, I work in a school, and I was working in a board with a kind of sustainability group, so I do have a lot of probably preconceptions, or I'm not objective, I guess, in a lot of ways. So I feel it's going to be a mix of both, maybe. But yeah, that's what I want to figure out as well. And how is it best to approach the analysis with that kind of, with your methodology that you've chosen, or methodologies that you've chosen, maybe.
Yeah, I feel the same as James, and it's interesting because I've got obviously my own kind of hypothesis and my own kind of judgment, but the same with Sarah. I'm looking at people's perceptions and the perceived kind of power of collectivism and stimulating change in schools, and I'm looking at a case study that I'm part of. I'm forming a sustainability network for a big educational federation, and the people I've interviewed and surveyed so far are people from different schools who've volunteered, they've put themselves forward to become participants of this network, and obviously they therefore have already a background in sustainability within their schools, or an interest and motivation. So I feel like I am getting a certain type of people which are going to have a certain mindset, so yeah, I'm finding that really interesting, because that's obviously giving me data that's very positively skewed into the mindset that I have. But yeah, it's challenging, because getting broader or wider data is more difficult, especially with the time I'm finding.
But to a large extent, that's okay, as long as you're recognizing that within what you're doing, and you're not pretending that it's a broad sample or whatever. But this is where, to some extent, the methodology chapter comes in, because that's putting a marker down as to the big perspective you're taking on the world and this research and so on. And then if you also recognize where, the fact that as you've described, that your sample has particular characteristics, and therefore may not be representative of a wider sample, then as long as you acknowledge that, then that's okay. You've described, sorry, go on, Beverly.
Yeah, I was going to say it also depends on the entry points. So that particular network is one point of entry. You could have another entry point, or another, say for example, another group, and then they can all come together at the end. So you're starting from different points. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah. So you're not dealing with just one group. Yeah? No? I mean, just an example of something I'm doing at the moment, where I'm going to use different WhatsApp groups. So they're different groups of parents from different Saturday schools. So they're a group in one chat, if you like. Then there's another group in another chat, but they're all different, they're different entry points. So then all of that would come together at the end. I mean, sorry, I wasn't here at the beginning, so I wasn't, privy to what you said before. But if that's helpful, I don't know.
I guess within the scope of the dissertation, very often Beverly, I guess that to compare what you've just said, some people might be just dealing with one WhatsApp group to get their data, and therefore they need to acknowledge that in the bigger scheme of things.
Yeah, I think everything as everything is fine as long as you have a justification for it. Is really the bottom line.
Okay, Brian, you were.
Yeah, I was interested in the Izzy's inductive deductive dilemma. Did you, anyone who's interviewed, did you find that that sort of thinking also affects whether you kind of probe into the interviewee's responses or you kind of progress the interview? Because when I was reading back one of my first ones, as I was reading it back, there were times when I thought, oh, it would have been really interesting to push into that, because that's one of the things I think is important. Whereas what I've got is a nice broad canvas of what the interviewee thought was important. So it was quite interesting to know how it impacts on the way that you carry out the interview, if you see what I mean, as well.
Okay.
I don't know what the question quite is there, but it's just something that I think relates back to exactly what Izzy was talking about.
Yeah, I think that is, and to some extent, that's why the semi-structured interview can be such a useful tool, because it gives you that opportunity to not be too rigid and to follow up but then again, that's where it's really important to establish your own perspective and point of view and how you're approaching this research in the first place, because that's going to influence what you follow up and how you follow up on some of the answers and that you get. Okay.
Just to follow up on a point that Brian made, actually, with when I was interviewing participants, I got really excited about the topic often in the interviews, and I was like, oh, that's a really fascinating point. And then I'll be like, oh, do you mean like this? Or I'd be latching onto keywords and then presuming that they understand, that their understanding of that word is the same as my understanding of that word. And then I'd have to stop myself and be like, wait, to confirm, do you mean it like this? Or, how do you interpret sustainability? Even we could take it at that level. And my participants had very varied understandings of the term and the concept, and based on very varied experiences of it and different jobs that had involved it and many who hadn't ever touched on the subject. So I had to finish an interview and reflect and be like, wait, was I pushing my ideas onto that interview? Was I thinking they were more interested in the subject, so I was more keen in the interview? And you just start asking yourself all these questions and being like, oh God, should I have done it again? Or should I don't know. So it definitely makes you think and reflect doing all of this.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing about the impact of the researcher on the research. And there's a lot that's been written about that, and the fact that just by being there, it can change how the responses might be if you weren't there and involved, and so on. What that person thinks, how they respond to you, do they tell you what you like? I think Sarah was pointing out that perhaps in the interviews they were partly trying to say what you wanted them to say. And then when you observed them, it was different. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's all interesting things, all interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think also, when you write up, it's about acknowledging the effects you might have on the interviewer and actually placing that as part of the reflexive part of your work when you write up. I mean, you could even have a heading that says reflexivity, and then talk about how your position in the work that you're carrying out, and your feelings and all that you could put in. If you're doing qualitative research, that is probably one of the better ways of doing it. or what would be expected if you're doing qualitative research.
Great. Amy, you started describing quite a bit of what you were already doing there, so maybe you'd like to pick up and just carry on with saying where you're at.
Yeah, I haven't started my methodology section yet, but I have been collecting a lot of data. So I've had 4 interviews, semi-structured, and I've got a few more lined up, and I've had 25 participants complete a survey. But I haven't really got into looking at how to analyze that data yet. It's kind of sat there like looking pretty, but I'm kind of a little bit scared to touch it. I think all the coding and everything I read in the last module freaked me out too much, but I know like we're not expected to do such advanced analysis on that. But yeah, I also, with the methodology section, as I'm collecting this data and like as I was doing my literature review, I kind of felt like initially I was action research, but then I'm not doing a full cycle. And then I'm like, well, this is a case study. And it really, so I feel like my methodology and methods, it's a combined kind of approach, which I know is okay. I'm just, yeah, I'm at the very beginning of reading and kind of planning that. So yeah, any advice from people further down the line would be great.
Okay.
Right. Well,
are you all? Yeah. Can I ask what approach you've each taken? Is it action research? Is it case study?
Well, actually, Amy, I'm in a similar situation to you. I thought I was going to be doing action research as well, because I was going to be experimenting with things and reflecting and trying to draw up, but as in the same I think Glenn, we talked about it, that you have to cycle. It has to be considered full action research. It has to go through the cycle a couple of times. So I've ended up in exactly the same situation as you, where I was like, well, what is it I'm actually doing? It is a case study, and then probably taking different approaches from different methods from different approaches, I think.
what's anybody else doing? Oh, so I've just had a message from Jaya. She was hoping to join us, but she can't make it, unfortunately. Her little boy's not very well.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think also the same dilemma as everyone else is experiencing. I've opted for community-based participatory research, I think, combined with a more case study approach. So it's unique to a particular set of circumstances and group, and yet the participants are really guiding my research process and the direction of the research. So that's the community-based participatory part. I think that's the direction I'm headed in. I just don't know to what extent I'm letting the participants guide my research, if that makes sense, and whether I'm still having the most impact on the research, or whether it's more equal. So I'm still trying to figure it out. I don't know if that was helpful.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think I'm in a very similar stage or place as Amy is. I've started doing some research, but it's also, I'm not sure where I am. I've looked into the methods and methodology, but I think I'm exactly what Amy was saying. And I still have a few more interviews to do. Well, I have to do my focus groups, so I've done my survey, but yeah, I think I'm in a similar place as Amy.
Yeah. And I think what you're doing, Charlotte, is more what we would term mixed methods, where you're doing the survey and then combined with the focus groups. So that makes it not just one thing or the other, not all quantitative, but a mixture of quantitative and qualitative.
Yeah. Okay. The I think sometimes it gets a bit confusing where methodology starts and finishes, where the general approach to the research is, and what the methods of data collection are.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You know, things are more complex than we often give them credit for. So
Yeah.
the methodology that, you know, positivist or grounded theory and all that, you know, that's your standpoint, your perspective on where you're doing. But that's important because some approaches to research and some methods fit with some methodologies better than others, etc. But then there's this whole area, you know, qualitative, quantitative. Well, that's just a simple, you know, division, and very often research involves both. Case study is an approach. Some people might refer to it as a method, but it's not a data collection method. It's an approach to the research. And you can have a case study, a positivist case study, an interpretative case study, etc., etc. And then, you know, and similarly with this whole action research thing. I mean, action research often involves a lot more qualitative approach, and it certainly fits with more of an interpretive kind of approach to research and so on. But it's an approach, and it's a general thing. And I went over this last time. I think that, you know, when it first became very popular, I would say back in the sort of 80s and so on, everything seemed to be action research if you were involved. So if you were in a school and it was your school and you wanted to do some research, it was action research. But actually it had to be a lot more rigorous than that, and it had to have this cycle, and it had to have that process within the cycle that was adhered to really be considered action research. And then you've got your data collection methods, which is what we've been talking about, your interviews, your surveys, your focus groups, the primary data collection. Then you've got secondary data collection, analyzing documents and so on like that. So and as Beverly said, a lot of the time what we're doing, more often than not, actually, in terms of the data collection, we're talking about mixed methods. Because apart from anything else, they kind of add to the validity if you're doing it in more than one way.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Glenn, sorry, could I just ask?
Yeah.
Again, is it possible for your approach to the research to change like halfway through, and then would you talk about that in the discussion or conclusion, as if like upon reflecting on that research process? Like you started with one idea, and then as you've collected the data, it's changed, and then you talk about that in the discussion section, or do you talk about that in the methodology section?
Well, it depends whether you've changed your methodological standpoint, whether you talk about it in the methodological section or not. But if you're from a dissertation, but thinking about the dissertation now as something you're doing to complete your MSc, rather than doing a specific piece of research which is going to have a report for somebody, which is, you know, discrete in itself. But the dissertation is part of your learning journey on the MSc, and it involves doing some research, but it also involves demonstrating that you understand the research process, and that's why you know there's sections on methodology and so on in there. So if you have a change, as you were just describing, Izzy, then you would need to, you know, justify, as Beverly said, you know, justify everything that you do, sort of thing, and build that in, because that would demonstrate part of your learning process as a part of doing the dissertation, which would be a good thing to have in the dissertation. What do you think, Beverly?
Yeah, I think sometimes people want to change because they don't think what they're finding is correct in quotes, but there's no such thing as correct. Basically, you're going where the data leads you. And in your write-up, if it doesn't quite work out how you expected it to, then that's part of your writing up as well. You were expecting X, Y, Z, because with most research, there's always some kind of inkling that you have about what you're going to find. And sometimes you might not find that. You go into the research with certain expectations, put it that way, and they might not always turn out the way you know, the way you thought. But that's fine, you know, that comes in your writing up as well. So that's how you justify it there. So it doesn't always have to be what you were expecting. Sometimes it's nice to have a surprise anyway.
Yeah.
Because that makes it more interesting. You could say, well, you know, I actually found this. I wasn't really expecting this, but this is what I found. And that makes it a lot more interesting sometimes.
Brian.
Yeah, it's a question that sort of builds on that a bit, but it's about the relationship between the literature review, which you wrote earlier, and now how we feel about it now that we're in doing our research. And the question really is that I think most of the stuff I wrote in the literature review came out of, if you like, the more academic readings and the theory stuff that we've been looking at over the last couple of years. And the bit that I felt I was missing at the beginning was a review of studies a bit like mine. And I don't know how to find them or where to go for those, or if that's as relevant as I think it is. Maybe it's not, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? So more papers and things that other people have done. I found that quite tricky to find stuff like that. Is that an important part of the literature review is the question, I guess.
Yeah. Is that about adding, so you've written the literature review, so is it about adding things later on? Because I always encourage students to, you know, you keep reviewing your literature review all the way through, basically. It's not really a finished document until you've actually finished the discipline.
Yeah, I guess the question is how do I, as I start to understand what it is more about what I'm doing, how do I find stuff that's a bit closer to it than maybe what I found so far? I guess it's sources of work like the sorts of work we're doing. Do I need to review some of that to contextualize my own?
Yes, you can do. I would say definitely. Oh, sorry, you disappeared from my screen. Yeah, yes, I would say definitely. As I was saying earlier, it's about reviewing all the time. So you might be, you finish your literature review, for example, and then you're doing some other reading and you find something that actually does make a lot of sense and it has some relation to what you're writing. So then you would include that. You might have to sort of pare down the literature review later on, but you can keep adding to it and then edit out certain things at the end, you know, and then leaving obviously the more relevant bits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense as a process.
Yeah.
Probably my question is, am I looking in the right places to find stuff? I think maybe I'm just struggling slightly there, sort of thing.
That's fine, Brian. Definitely one of the things that you should do is look to see what else has been researched, you know, what other research has gone that's similar to what you're doing. That was definitely something that you would do in the literature review. But if you don't find anything, then that's good in a sense as well, because you're making a contribution to an area that's you know, not very well covered. And if you can't find it and you're immersing yourself in all of this, if you can't find it, then the chances are that nobody else is going to find it either. So
thanks, Glenn, that's sort of reassuring.
Yeah,
you're creating new knowledge and then you become the expert.
Yeah, okay. Sarah.
Sarah's got her hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's going back to talking about reflections and things and new knowledge that you find. and reflecting on your role within the process. Is that where is that sort of written? Is that written during your findings, within your findings, or is it in your conclusions and reflections at the end generally?
Right, there are two places actually that you could put that. You can actually put that at the end of your methodology chapter, because that is that's a part of the methodological process, if you like. Or you can put it at the end in something called reflections and what's the other title you call it? Reflections and
conclusions.
Conclusions. Okay.
And also sometimes you might want to offer some recommendations.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that would be, so if I thought one thing at the start of the process and research has made me think about that a bit more deeply, and some of the questions that rises, so therefore a recommendation is to look further into this to find the best way of doing something, for example. And another question on the back of that is that when we're writing up our findings, obviously when we wrote up the literature review and the methodology chapter, we're using academic references, but in the findings, I'm going to be using quotes from people who I've interviewed, or quotes or ideas from participant observation, or bits from real data. And I know that you can sort of write it in a teacher A said blah, or person A said X, but I'm wondering how to actually formulate it within a sentence. How if you're in the middle of you're talking about a conversation, but you want to insert a quote into it to make it speak based on the actual data, and normally you'd put like brackets around it and give the reference. How would you do that with a person? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not. Sorry, Karen, Glenn.
Oh, well, you're probably going to say come up with as much as I can. Yes, I mean it's a bit difficult with to talk about this in a kind of abstract way, but I mean, you could be writing about a particular interview that you conducted. So you can say at the beginning that you can either give it as teacher A, or more likely describe the person's role, as it were. So, classroom teacher, or a senior manager in the, whatever. And then, and if you're writing under that, you can just refer that this is what they said and so on. But there is no, you can set up, and I think this is what I did in my PhD, where I had the interviews and the roles of the people that were interviewed, and then gave them a code, like either a pseudonym or a code like teacher A, teacher B, and just putting that in the brackets afterwards. If you've got them listed somewhere, that this was their role and this is what you're calling them, then that's fine. I mean, you're a creative person, Sarah. You can.
Yeah, it's really a matter of style. At the end of the day, it's really a matter of style. I mean, you could start off by, especially if it's a big quote, you could sort of summarize some of the quote, and then put part of it as a directed speech, if you like. Yeah. That's one way of doing it. If it's a long quote, you don't want to have a really long quote, so you might have to summarize part of it, just take out the main bits, and then something like a prominent part of what they said, you could probably put that in direct speech.
Okay. I think in particularly in qualitative research, some direct quotes, obviously not whole loads of things, but some key key quotes are some of the most powerful evidence and analysis of what you've produced, and really quite important things to get in there.
Yeah, and just that, thank you for that. And just with that, just while it's in my mind, is it normal as well within the finds? Normal, it's not the right word, but would you typically expect to see academic quotes within the findings as well? So where you're going back and referencing somebody maybe from the literature review or from anything really, would you expect to see those sorts of quotes there too?
Absolutely, because what you want to do is to show that, for example, if you found something specific in your research, to be able to point back to something else, you know, like another academic found XYZ, another piece of research found XYZ that was sort of near to what you said, then you could use that as like a sort of justification. You know, here is proof in a way that this is the way it is. So yes, you know, what your findings interspersed with other quotations from other bits of research and things that you've read. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Brian.
It's me again. I've got a little question. Glenn, were you going I think what I'm trying to do with my data, my kind of transcripts from the interviews, is discourse analysis. Now that's something that I've never done before, and I wonder whether you've got any words of wisdom about the approaches you take with discourse analysis, or have you got several weeks?
No. I think off the top of my head, I think the short answer is no, but
no, I don't either.
I think it's an interesting area to do, because what you're talking, I think well, perhaps you'd like to explain a little bit further, right?
I'll tell you what I think it is, because
well, yes, but also put it in the context of what you're doing. Yeah.
So the research is looking really at people who have taken some sort of step in their lives towards trying to respond to sustainability issues, if you like, whatever that is. And the idea is not to sort of rank people or someone's contributions bigger than someone else's. It's really if someone feels they've made a change. And the research is trying to look at the catalysts. I don't like the word trigger, but the catalyst to that change. So when I'm interviewing people, it's quite open, listening to their narrative and their story about what it is they've done, what their little life story is, and also to try and get them to kind of dig in a little bit and explain what the impacts have been that have made them want to change something or do something differently. Now, obviously, I've got a number of things which I think I'd like, you know, that might emerge. And I've got one fully transcribed interview so far, and the things which I thought might emerge actually did emerge, but in different proportions, perhaps, than mine, but in really interesting ways. And the person was really sort of honest about it. So what I've started doing is I've started sort of looking for phrases within the text that are meaningful in respect to things that I'm looking at. And I'm sort of codifying those. And it turns out there's about 10 things that have emerged from the first interview. And they were the sorts of things I thought might do. And then what I'm going to do is look and see, sort of contextualize their comments, try and interpret their comments around the 10 themes, and then look across my interviewees to see whether there's consistency, any links, any commonality, that kind of thing. I think that's what discourse analysis is, isn't it? I'm going beyond just the frequency or use of words, but I'm trying to understand the context and the meaning of the comments they've made around the themes. That's what I'm trying to do.
I think it's quite closely related to narrative, a narrative approach to research and analysis as well, which is something that, you know, I'm a little bit more familiar with.
Yeah.
But yeah, go on, Beverly.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with you. It sounds very much, you know, the sort of thing we do in qualitative research, where you have all your data and you identify themes, and that's part of your analysis. And so each interview you go through, you see based on what people say, and then you put certain chunks of what they say in one part under a particular heading, and then you get an idea of how many people are actually saying the same thing. You know, discourse analysis, I don't know much about it, but I've heard the term used before, and it's mostly, I think certain disciplines use that terminology, but I haven't seen it much in, you know, in what I've been doing anyway. But
okay,
yeah,
no, that's helpful. I think I was trying. So what I recognize the narrative, if you like, analysis that you're talking about, and I probably need to have a chat to Paul about it, because when I described to him what I was doing, he also said, and discourse analysis too. So I think I probably need to have a chat with him and see how he thought it was linking to perhaps what I was doing.
Yeah.
I think yes. In his eco-psychology work, that he's probably come across more of that sort of thing. But it's kind of, I mean, what you described sounded as a perfectly legitimate way about going about things, looking for, and to some extent it was parallel in a narrative approach, looking for commonalities in people's stories and the context of those stories and so on. So yeah. I'm conscious Mwenya's got a hand up.
Yeah.
So Mwenya, can we hear what you've got to say?
Okay, so I actually feel a bit behind because I'm feeling I'm not on the level as everybody. I'm still on the literature review, also collecting the data. So my question is, as I'm doing my literature review and collecting data at the same time, I'm finding that my literature review is kind of taking a different shape from what I had, and I don't know if that is okay. I feel I'm going back, changing a lot of things and including a lot of things, and feeling like I need to be doing more readings. Should my data change the literature review? That's kind of my question.
Okay, I think, you know, doing things in parallel is fine. I would suggest for someone doing a dissertation, you do the literature review, and then once you've collected your data and you know, you start writing up and all that, you might want to, if you find anything else, then you can add it. Because I think, especially when you're dealing, I'm just speaking from the point of view of the fact that you're doing a dissertation with a limited amount of time. If you had all the time in the world, I'd say go for it. But just looking at the sort of time span you have, I think it might become a bit of a distraction, if that makes sense. So I would do the literature review, and you could always, you know, make some changes to the literature review afterwards. I don't know what you think about that.
The literature review, I mean, ideally, you would hopefully sort of think things through and be able to capture most of what you want in the literature review before going forward. But as Brian was saying about, you know, there's the academic stuff that you should be able to cover okay. But then if you're for example, if you were looking at schools in a particular educational authority area or a particular country, there may be policies and guidelines that have been published that are very relevant for your research, and hopefully you would find them, you know, early on and include them. But they are certainly things that could be put into your literature review, because they're going to probably influence what you're doing in terms of your research. So and it may be that if you're interviewing people, say, I don't know what you're doing exactly, Manu, but say you're interviewing people in a school and all of a sudden came across a policy in that school that you thought was particularly relevant, then you should get it into the dissertation somehow. Whether you go back and put it into the literature review or not, well, you know, that's a decision that you would have to take and think how best to incorporate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It's great. I'm very pleased that people are asking questions and we're getting discussions and comments back from other people. But I'm also conscious that some people haven't talked a lot about their own.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Charlotte, would you like to say a little bit about what you're doing? Or and then we'll come to Moenyu and Brian after that, and that. Yeah.
I don't really have that much to say. I saw Beverly.
That's fine.
Beverly a few weeks ago, so I've done my literature review. I'm doing it on teachers' awareness on sustainable issues, focusing on household waste management, and seeing where it is and how it can be implemented in the classroom and in the curriculum. And I'm using teachers from my school. So I sent out questionnaires this week, and I'm doing it with 10 teachers, primary school teachers. I started looking through the results. I don't want to start analyzing them yet because I'm nowhere near at that point. And then we have a holiday next week. So after that, I'm hopefully going to be able to go through it, and then I can actually think of the questions and the relevant things I want to discuss based on the results they've given me. So yeah, I think I'm kind of where I should be. I feel like I'm a bit behind, but I'll catch up in the next.
Yeah. So the survey, the focus group would then pick up on some of the things that maybe the survey couldn't quite catch, because you're still very limited with the survey, even though there's sort of, the questions are a bit more open than, you know, you have the closed questionnaires and then you have some open questionnaires. So so then the focus group would pick up on some of the things that you couldn't pick up on in the survey. So that should work well.
Yeah, that's it really.
Okay, that's fine.
I think Moenyu's got her hand up from last time.
Oh, Moenyu, do you want to say a little bit more about what you're doing?
Okay, yeah. So my topic is applying education for sustainability principles to address cultural practices that impact the education of girls. So there's a lot that has been written about the topic, a lot. So as I'm doing my literature review, is it okay, like, to have a little bit of change in a question where it takes a different direction, because what I was expecting is not what I'm finding in the literature review. So I had things that I thought, this is what I would expect, this is what I put. But as I read, I find that it's quite taking a whole different turn. I don't know if maybe I have too much information and I don't know where to put it, where to place it, and how to make it flow in the literature review. Also, just having I've read my question, shared my topic, I'd like to know if I can have both quantitative and qualitative kind of data after I analyze it. Yeah.
Right. I think this is one for me, because I've been working with you on even though I haven't seen you for the last time, but I think what the topic that you're doing doesn't actually quite lend itself to quantitative data. It really doesn't, because you're trying to find out about the girls and their experiences, and there are a lot of sort of cultural factors that impact their ability to stay in school, for example. So I think a lot of it, I think it's really a qualitative research study, because you're trying to get at their views, their feelings, their perceptions, and I don't think that you will be able to capture that so much in quantitative data.
Okay, thank you.
I also think that, and as Beverly mentioned earlier, if what you're finding out doesn't actually seem to match what you were expecting, or and where you covered in your literature review, that's not a problem. As far as the dissertation is concerned, that gives you something really interesting to talk about in one sense. It's probably, I mean, a lot of research ends up throwing up more questions at the end rather than answering lots of questions, and that's fine. Just because, and I was going to say this immediately after Beverly was talking, but a successful dissertation doesn't mean that you had some research and you were able to answer your question successfully necessarily. If you did some research and it proved that it wasn't what you were expecting to find out, and it didn't answer your question, then that can be just as successful a dissertation, because you can get into the whys and wherefores of how that has come about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
This
Brian,
is why every piece.
Sorry, Beverly.
I was going to say, this is why every piece of research, you're always left with some unanswered questions, and then you could do that for your further study. So always leave something for your further study.
Right. I'm aware we still need to hear a little bit more about the research from some people. Brian, do you want to?
So I do give you a quick summary.
Yeah.
So my title was this sort of sustainability: what lies between information and action, is what I'm trying to get to. So I've lined up some interviews, and because I'm not working within an organization, that's quite tricky, because obviously who I approach is going to have quite a big bearing on the sort of answers I get. So I've tried to balance that a bit by having some variety in the sorts of people I'm talking to. So the interview that I've done so far was a relatively easy connection to make, because it was a teacher that I'd worked with previously who'd left a job, and I knew she did that because there were certain things she wanted to do related to kind of environment and sustainability. And we had a conversation that lasted about an hour, and there were lots of themes that came out of there which were consistent which with the sorts of themes that I might have expected. I'm also interviewing a person I know who set up a sort of sustainability kind of container-free business where you kind of collect product from her. And that seems to be going really well. And I've met her a couple of times. So that's someone with a sort of business approach. And it was interesting because in the first interview, it turned out that my interviewee one knew this other person and made comments like, well, it's people like that that make me able to do things more sustainably. So that was quite an interesting little link. So there's a business sort of response to it. I've got a student who's from South America who's come to the UK and done a lot of WWOOF volunteering on organic farms in the UK and is now doing an anthropology course at London University. So he's made some really big decisions, although he's relatively young. And Glenn, I'm also coming up to BMC next week, to Black Mountains College, and they've allowed me to stand in front of their students who have made choices to go on courses to do with sustainability and ecology at their college. And I'm going to try and persuade 3 of them to let me interview them about their lives and the choices they've made. So that's I'm aiming for 6. I think that'll be quite a lot of data to analyze. And so that's where I am with it, really. So I've done one, seemed to work, and I'm looking forward to probably 5 more interviews over the next week and a bit.
Brilliant.
Very good.
So that's where I am. One of the questions I had about the process I'll go through when I'm analysing the data is how much of the evidence, if you like, my sort of raw material, do I pull into my dissertation? Because I remember when we did that sort of critique of that the report that you presented to us, the last piece of work we did. One of my criticisms was there was a real lack of transparency in it in terms of source material, and there weren't any direct quotes from people, and I just felt it was very sort of it had been the research had been distanced from the reader in the report a little bit. So I was trying to work out how much sort of evidence and raw material I need to show and how I might show that in my final report, if you see what I mean.
Well, definitely from the sounds of the types of interviews you're doing, can you imagine there's going to be a lot of quotations from the interview. We definitely don't usually expect to see all the raw, well, we don't expect to see all the raw data. There may be some elements of it that you feel you want to put into an appendix, but be very wary about appendix and stick to the idea that, you know, it's things that you really feel the reader should want to see and read, and not just bung loads of stuff in because it's there, as it were. Whatever you do, make sure the appendix isn't bigger than the dissertation, because you know you've done something wrong then.
So Glenn, that's more about sort of real clarity in your method, is it? So that your reader knows sort of how you approached it and what you've done.
Yes, well, for example, if you're using a questionnaire, then a blank questionnaire, a copy of that in your appendix is fine. And it's really very, very useful to the reader, because you're not going to repeat it all. I mean, you're going to talk about those questions, the responses to those questions, but a copy of your questionnaire as an appendix is classic, you know, what should be there sort of thing. But definitely not hordes, not lots of raw data, because the whole point is that you analyze and present your results. That's part of your process and so on, and that's what we want to see, the outcomes of that process, not the raw data. But in analyzing it, you're going to actually draw on it, refer to it, and so on. So we will get to see important aspects of that data through quotations or through summaries that you've pulled together.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Izzy, you haven't given us a background on yours, and I don't think we didn't finish it with yours either, did we, Amy? Or
going around each person give a small
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, I can provide a quick summary. My topic is, so the premise is bridging the gap between corporation and community, and it focuses on corporate volunteering. So exploring the opportunities for education for sustainability in a corporate volunteering program. It's a case study approach because it's actually a charity that I've been volunteering with for, I think it's 3 years now, a conservation charity based in Surrey Heath. And it's quite a small charity. So the participants are all the committee members on this charity. And the idea is, one of the outcomes of the research is to develop a proposal for the charity to then take either into their community or approach local corporations with this corporate volunteering program outline. But also another one of my aims is to develop more generalized learnings that can help other charities. It's and that's the one that's quite difficult, because although it is a case study approach, corporate volunteering itself is quite a topical, new, exciting kind of field for many corporations at the moment. And a lot of companies have an obligation to do that as part of their CSR reporting now. And often it is the companies who dictate the corporate volunteering programs, as opposed to the charities themselves who say, we want this, it'd be great if your employees could help us do the XYZ work. So the idea of my research is really to give the voice to the charity itself and explore what they need, and how EFS could be embedded within that program. So I conducted a focus group a couple of weeks ago with the committee members. That was really great. And touching upon a point I made earlier in the call, I kind of let the group, so I introduced the idea to the group and said, what are people's thoughts? What are people's thoughts about this? What's your understanding of corporate volunteering? Do you think it's something Surrey Heath could do? Some people said yes, some people said no, and then we explored that a little bit more. And then out of that focus group, we decided, instead of a more formal, like local companies could send their employees on a week or 2 week long program with Surrey Heath, instead it would be for more those companies where employees could volunteer like on a regular basis, so like once a month or once every 2 weeks. And then if you were to track those employees' progress and had a set like number of learning outcomes that follow the kind of education for sustainability rationale and thinking, then that's the approach Surrey Heath wanted to take. That's the approach that this charity wanted to take. So yes, I've in terms of dissertation progress, I've drafted the intro, got a kind of general outline of the literature review. I've just finished the methodology section. That was really challenging. I think I'm at where I wanted to be at this stage. Everything's very not cemented yet. I'm still continuously adding to the literature review. I'm still debating whether I'm a critical realist or if I'm a positive. I don't know what I think about the world. So each of the chapters are very open-ended, and I think I'm just going to be continuously adding to them throughout the whole process. But that's the stage I'm at the moment, and that's a short summary of the topic, or my thinking of the topic and the direction I want to follow in this area.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
Any question? Yeah, Beverly.
I just have one small question. You're doing it based on a particular charity.
Yes.
So I was wondering where your work ends and then the charity begins, because there's always, when you're doing work within organizations like that, you also have to show that the piece of work you're doing for the dissertation, it's still an independent piece of work. Are you with me?
Yes, absolutely. I do understand that. So I think I'd bring the theory elements into the more generalized findings. So how this process can help other charities and how education for sustainability could fit into a more general corporate volunteering program or structure. And then based on this research, I will then summarize it for the charity and produce something separate for them, which I won't submit as part of the dissertation. So I'd keep those two things separately, because I kind of joked in the interview. I said, well, I'm going to have 15,000 words to show you guys by the end of this. And they said, oh, no, Izzy, we just want 500, please, or something very short and something that we can understand, you know, which would be something very different to what I'll be producing for the purpose of the dissertation, I think. Just is that the right thinking?
I understand now. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
And I can see why you raised the question, you know, why the impact of the researcher on the research is because you've been volunteering with that charity for a long time. Then obviously, you know, keeping those two roles, being a volunteer in the charity, but also now being a researcher, looking at the charity, is going to be quite challenging to keep the boundaries, as it were.
Yeah, and I'm kind of vested in it. I want it to work because I'm part of it, and I want, you know, whatever the outcomes of corporate volunteering could and how that could benefit the charity. I want to make that happen, but then I need to separate myself as a volunteer and be like, okay, it might. I don't want to force it if it's not naturally going to happen either, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions from Abby? Okay.
Sounds great, actually. Sounds like a great project.
Oh, thank you, Beverly.
And Amy, did you have the opportunity to say what you wanted to say about your own research previously? I know. I think we got caught up on questions and then we went off on.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I'm looking at a collective approach to educational change. So I'm looking at the potential of collectivism in promoting education for sustainability through the creation of a teacher sustainability network through an organisation called Phobasia, which is a federation of British schools in Asia. And yes, so I am involved in the creation of this network with Phobasia and another sustainability champion, who's a sustainability coordinator at another Phobasia school. So yeah, the time kind of span of the thesis of the dissertation is just the onboarding process and the initial kind of meetings with the participants, with all the members of this network. So there's only a limited amount I can do for action research, but yeah, the actual, it's interesting because I'm studying something that I'm setting up as well. So I've spent a lot of time working on this, but it's not necessarily the research side, it's the practical kind of talking and organizing and planning and things. So I feel like I've done a lot of work, but it's not necessarily been on my study. I also found with the literature review that it was a bit of a bottomless pit of discovery. Even like the concept of collectivism, you know, I was like, oh, professional learning communities, all great, communities of practice, all social learning, all collectivism and individualism mindsets, you know, just going off in so many different directions. I found it so hard to pin myself down to things. But what I think is really interesting, and I'm finding now through my interviews and my surveys, is that a lot of collective learning and collective action, you know, recently has been bottom up and kind of, you know, student activism, you know, and Fridays for Futures and things like that. And this network has got a kind of bottom up, top down approach, in that it's the teachers themselves that are going to be the activists for change within their schools, facilitated by this network. But because the network is, it's a Phobasia network, it's this federation, that the individual British international schools have joined, it's got a bit of a top-down approach because it's got that authority and that leadership. And what I'm noticing with the interviews I've done so far is that, you know, when people are talking about the potential power of this collective, of this network, they say, oh yeah, but it very much depends on the support from our senior management team. You know, if our principal is on board, you know, if our head of secondary is on board, then things will happen, you know, big changes will happen. And so what, you know, on a personal level, not just an academic one, you know, I'm excited that this will at least raise the profile of sustainability, you know, and kind of urge some less sustainably minded schools to make changes, because the Phobasia organisation, I've been a part of Phobasia through the schools that I've worked for over a decade, and there are other networks, which are things like music and sport, you know. A lot of changes have been made within those departments or those areas of the schools because there's been this expectation from Phobasia for all schools to participate and to be involved. So yeah, it's got a lot of potential, but
yeah, sounds yeah, I think it's very similar in the sense to Izzy's, in the sense that you know, you're doing two things, you know, you're involved in something, you're also researching it, and just trying to find that balance, you know, in order to produce that piece of academic work specifically for your dissertation.
Yeah, and I think I'm right in thinking that you'll be doing most of this interviews and so on online, because you're based in Vietnam and your participants are spread across Asia. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds
So,
very interesting as well. Yeah.
And Sarah was in quite a similar position in the sense that she was, you know, as part of her job role, she was asked to do something, and that's, you know, become part of. But at least she's actually in the school and seeing people face to face.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but I think, Sarah, you had a similar thing in trying to separate out what you were doing, which was part of your professional job role, from what you were doing for your dissertation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, though, I'm going to have to be careful in how I say this. The school went into quite full crisis mode with Omicron, and that kind of took precedence of everything. I mean, people were off, sick, and job roles were, you know, I don't know, it was really chaotic between December and January. And because of that, sustainability, and this is going to be something that comes out in my findings of, I'll be arguing with something I was saying in my literature review about ESD1 and ESD2, and, you know, it's important to just do something, to work within the structures to do something, and that when something happened, it was very easy to put sustainability on the back burner as a lower priority, and I mean, from a research point of view, that's been really helpful, because it's actually helped me to separate myself from, right, I'm trying to do this for my work and I'm trying to research. Actually, at the moment, I'm just researching it because it's kind of lost a bit of momentum. Now, I know from a work point of view and whatever, at some point, probably it, you know, there's enough agreed in principle that people are behind certain things. So what am I trying to say? That Omicron kind of was a blessing for my research.
A blessing in disguise. Yeah. It created a space.
Yeah.
But equally, I do actually feel quite passionate about trying to incorporate it into the school. But as I've said, the research that I have done has really made me question of the way that needs to be done with adult students from different backgrounds, that it's not a one size fits all, and there's so much danger of assumptions and imposition of values and blah blah blah, that that having the space has made me step away, has made me think about things. But there's no reason to not change energy suppliers or reduce water consumption or look at certain things within the building, for sure, that's certainly manageable. But yeah, I was in that position, and it was, yeah.
It's quite interesting what you said about how, you know, sustainability put on the back burner, because we've seen that time and time again, particularly, you know, in companies that sort of, when everything's going well and the profits are up and everything, they, oh great, you know, they're doing all this wonderful sustainability stuff. But when things are tough, when the sustainability principles should be really kicking in, it's when they jettison this, you know, that for, yeah, into some sort of survival mode. Or,
and I feel as well that that's kind of, it goes back to the principles of this course about transformative education and about changing of values, that really, if that hasn't happened, then it's just really easy for it to be put on the back burner, because it's not the driving force in everything that you do.
Yeah. Brian.
It was just a comment on something that Amy said. When that difficulty of linking up kind of grassroots energy within an organization and management, and whether it's supported in a school, one aspect that's worth thinking about is the governance role. So it's quite interesting, because recently I've been asked to join a local school as a governor, and I said, well, I'd do it, but this is my condition. And I said, look, I'm interested in sustainability at all levels, and if you ask me to do this, I'm going to be pushing this entirely. And they immediately said, oh, thank goodness, yeah, run with it, do it. So, and already some of the connections I've made with the teachers are ones that the leadership probably wouldn't have made, you know, and the enabling that's starting to happen with teachers and parents and the kids is stuff that perhaps leadership wouldn't have kicked off, because that's not what they thought is on the top of their agenda, as running a school kind of thing. So I don't know, I just wanted to throw that in, because it's quite an interesting way of getting an advocate, if you like, you know, for that cause that bridges across grassroots and leadership in a school kind of thing.
That's a very good point, actually. Yeah. So sorry, who's next?
Well, I think we've been around everybody's dissertation, what they're doing. Obviously, it's very open for any other questions or comments or anything now. Oh, we've been going for about an hour and a half, so we've done pretty well. Just one final comment to you, Brian. Back in 2006, we did some research or some members of the course team did some research, and Paul was a member of that group, into further education colleges and why. We interviewed about 30 or 40 people in the further education sector, people who were known to be sort of proactive in sustainability, and people were aware that they were doing stuff, and the point was to ask them why were they doing it, you know, what had made them sort of take this on. This was 2006, so you know it was still a prominent topic, but perhaps not as much as it is today. And one of the outcomes from that, and Paul can talk to you more about this, is the fact that it was the influences in their personal lives as opposed to their professional lives that caused them to do what they were doing. Which it's quite interesting. And there is a report on that. If Paul hasn't got it, I've got it, and
I think I need that in my literature review.
Okay, well, I'll send it to you anyway then. I think
any more comments from anyone?
Yeah, this isn't a question. I just wanted to add that everybody's dissertation sounds really amazing, all the topics, and that the course itself, I just wanted to say a big thank you because it's just made me question absolutely everything and anything I do in a good way. And it's opened up so many new ways of thinking. So I just wanted to extend a thanks, and that I'm really enjoying the whole research process to both Beverly and Glenn and everyone here as well, just as a comment.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, really well said, Izzy. I completely endorse every word of that, really.
Yeah, me too. Or me three. Yeah.
And you're the last.
Yeah,
You're the last after.
about
Actually, no,
10 or 15 minutes ago, I was just sitting here thinking, I'm really enjoying this, and this is probably the last time I'm ever going to do it. So it's quite sad in that saying.
Is this the last time that we'll see you?
Probably.
Yeah, but we're here to be contacted, and you know, if you need to get in touch with anything. I don't know how it's going to work going forward. If I haven't got a contract with LSBU, I won't have their email or address and so on. I was just thinking that like I've got two. I did one yesterday, and I've got two more references to write for graduates from this program who want to do PhDs or other courses and things like that. So which, you know, it comes with the territory and something we're doing all the time. Sometimes it's quite hard to write these things, but hopefully there may be something that keeps us connected to LSBU and we can maintain that. But I'm quite happy. If that is not going to be the case, I'll try and make sure I share I can share my other email anyway. It's quite easy. It's glenn@glennstrachan.co.uk, my other email. So I'm always there if you need anything in that respect or whatever in the future.
Yeah, and if any of you want to do a PhD, you know, we're willing to help. I'm sure some of you might want to go on and do further study. I would thoroughly recommend it. Yeah. So yeah, it's been really great. Actually, I don't think it's the last one, Glenn. I think we've got probably about 6 or more students who will be doing dissertations next year.
Yeah, I think you've got one little cohort behind us, haven't you?
Yes, that's right. Sorry, I forgot about. We have.
Whether we're going to be involved or not.
Yeah, that is the other thing as well. We don't know if we're going to be involved.
I think they might say, okay, you don't need a team anymore, Jay. You can just do.
Yeah, they'll probably get poor Jay will probably be lumbered with all of it.
Well, I'll just take this opportunity to Amy and Sarah. Have you reconnected? Because I was standing in for Jaya. Have you reconnected with Jaya? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm meeting her this week.
Oh, right. Me too.
Yeah.
So, but obviously, if you need to get back in touch with me, that's fine as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Moenia.
Maybe just before, I don't know, I'm unable to access my VLE. I don't know why. It keeps on telling me it's under maintenance, but I would love to get some of the modules that we went through in the previous semesters, because my as I mentioned, my topic is looking at the some of the principles in education for sustainability. So some of those include human rights, participation, values, in the SDGs. So I don't know if anybody can drop me in my email or how I can access them.
Yeah, I thought that was sorted out though. Did you not sort that out with the computer department?
Yes, it was. I'm able to access my email, but every time I go to the modules, it is telling me the system is under maintenance. Yeah.
Oh.
It's been telling me that for some time now. And I think that is the last part of my literature review. So I've been quite stuck for a while. I was going to email or WhatsApp you. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize that you were still having problems. I thought that was sorted out. Okay, let's have a conversation about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Beverly, I don't know if you've got all the stuff from previous modules or anything like that, but if you need anything from module 1 or module 3, then give me a shout and we can share it with Moenia.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Any last things?
Charlotte,
You okay?
you're okay. Okay. So Charlotte and Moenia are my 2 students. So I'm just trying to make sure you're okay too.
Right.
Well, I
Well,
want to make sure everybody's okay.
Yeah, maybe just to say this has been a very good meeting. I really appreciate. It's opened my mind where I was stuck. I feel I'm a bit clear, and yeah, it keeps on shaping and giving me direction, kind of. Yeah. So thank you very much for organizing it.